Hey, welcome to The Perspective today. I'm Mike Sherbino. Want to ask you a question. Where were you in 1976? Well, I know where I was. I was starting college, first year, and all excited about that. But maybe even more importantly to the broader artistic community was the fact that ABBA, remember the Swedish pop group, they released their latest song, which was called Money, Money, Money. I don't know if they did that because I had spent so much money on tuition or money that I had gotten from my dad, but nonetheless, that song became quite popular. I want to talk today about money. And here to help us again is a financial advisor, lives in the States, travels all over, head of global wealth management, Erik Weir. Erik is no stranger to The Perspective. And Erik, we just want to welcome you back. Thanks for squeezing this into your schedule. Welcome.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. And thank you for having me out today, Mike. Always a pleasure.
And so where were you in 1976? I'm going to, you're probably going to say you weren't born yet, right?
1976, I was 9 years old, and I was likely on a mongoose bicycle reenacting the Evel Knievel jump in front of my house to the terror of my parents and the thrill of my neighborhood kids.
Okay, well, you just dated you and myself. So I started university when I was 8. I just wanted you to know that.
I did it on purpose. So I wanted to make sure I got that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, you did that very, very skillfully.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I wish I had more time to prepare. I would have had something more challenging, but you got me on a quick notice.
You've written a book that we've talked about a lot in the program. It's called Who's Eating Your Pie? And it's all about financial principles, but you've woven it into a fascinating story of yourself. We're making it available today to the first 20 people who write into our program free of charge. It's such an exciting book. And you know what? I don't want to blow smoke here, but it's the best financial book I've read in the last few years. So what's the premise about it? Just relive that whole story. You got 5 boys. That's your problem. And, how did it come to this title, Who's Eating Your Pie? Explain that.
Yeah, the funny thing is I was, I was sitting down one evening and I was writing checks to pay taxes. And you got to pay quarterly estimated tax. And I was probably saying something like it didn't enjoy this or ride grouse or whatever. And my son goes, "Daddy, what are taxes?" I'm like, how do you explain taxes to like a young kid, 7, 8 years old? About that time, his mom brought apple pie with ice cream on top. And I went in with a big stroke and he took a big forkful and ate it right in front of him. He was just shocked. Like, I can still see his face today. And he was just shocked and really off-put by the whole thing. So then I come back slowly for a second time, and with 2 hands, he blocks me. And I'm like, the first one was taxes. The second one is planning. And he was like, he's never forgot that to this day.
Well, it became the title for a book. So I hope you cut him in on the shares of profit that you're making.
No, not at all. No,
not at all.
He cost me so much through college. He's never getting cut.
I want to ask you today some tough questions about money. And they're the simple questions. I know you've been asked them a dozen times. And if people don't ask them, it's lurking in their mind. Unpack this first question. Simply, what is the most common and pressing question that people ask you when they're in that panic mode?
How do I get out of debt? How do I pay my bills? And what happens oftentimes is your creativity shrinks to being very, very small, and you're like white or black or vanilla or chocolate, and you just really run out of options. And I think we allow ourselves to get there. And what I try to do is point people back to like the first chapter of my book called Permission to Dream, where it's just, if how would you start anew and just to re-envision yourself, and how would you create more income, and how would you, be thoughtful about the income that you have, or resources that you have.
It's interesting that you've called the first chapter Permission to Dream. We're not psychiatrists, at least I'm not going to profess to be. But what causes, is it the stress, the pressure of the moment, a multitude of bad decisions?
I think it's stress, it's bad decisions, but I think more than anything what I've seen is we believe lies about ourselves, like we're not enough, we don't have the education, or we believe, you'll never amount to anything, or things we may have heard as kids. And I think oftentimes identifying the lies we believe and tearing those down and realize you're creating God's image and you can accomplish just about anything with clarity, I think is a starting point, because then you take the blinders off and you're not thinking, I'm going to get a 50-cent raise, or I'm going to sell my sofa, but you're Not that those aren't options, but I mean, you probably have more options than that.
Well, we think back to the ABBA song, Money, 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 and you've made it, you've lost it, and you've made it again. And now you advise people on how to increase it. So you live with that whole tension. What would be the first thing that you would say to someone to help them to get out of debt? And let's not talk about a young person. Let's start with somebody who's maybe 50, okay?
And I'll start by saying each situation is different and needs thoughtful consideration. But in broad terms, oftentimes we end up in a situation like that because of previous decisions, right? And sometimes we still have those. We're still making those decisions, maybe out of stress. So we'll turn to alcohol, we'll turn to tobacco, we'll turn to fast food, we'll turn to things that might be healthful for us. They're also quite expensive. It's almost like a coping mechanism. So if we can begin to reduce that, and then we can begin to think, hey, I'll take half an hour a day and think creatively and try to plan it. What could I do? Could I do a side venture? Could I do something in addition to what I'm currently doing? Could I improve where I am and try to kind of simultaneously attack the income side and the expense side? And there was a time in my life where we tried to really cut back, and we actually had a garden and said, hey, can we have a garden and reduce the money we spend at the grocery store? Can we do a garage sale? Can we do things of that nature? And I've lived through that. As a kid, you might saw my parents' cars repossessed and washer dryer repossessed, and lived in a sort of not particularly happy but willing family member's house for 6 months. So I've seen all this in action, and I know you can come out the other side.
So that's encouraging to hear that you can come out the other side. But when that happens, what about the emotional psychic of people? What would you say to people? How do you protect that? How do you stay strong when you have to readjust big time?
Yeah, I just try to keep it really simple. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If I can just say that, then I can move forward. Or I try to, if I get in a bad spot, go for a walk or do push-ups or have cold water, put cold water on my face. But I mean, it's a mental game more as much as it is anything else. And the lies we believe, the limits we put on ourselves, well, that'll never happen. And that's when I talk about goal setting. I try to take all those away and start from the top down, because if I start from the bottom up, the first thing I think is why something's not going to work. I'm going to get a bit of why I can't do that, or I'm going to, do a side job, but why I can't do that. So you have to start from the top down. I need $1,000 more a month. Okay, how can I get there? And then I make a list of 20 practical things I could do that could potentially earn me $1,000 that month. And then I take action that day. And just by taking action, whether it's successful or not, your stress and tension goes down probably 80, 90%. And you do that each day until you attain your goal. And then you get clarity, but you build some clarity around those goals and just take action.
I talked recently to a family who are recent immigrants, and they were talking about how they'd put out so many applications for jobs and just no response. But then finally, things broke free for them. And they were at the verge of quitting when finally there was a breakthrough. Thoughts on that?
I mean, applying for jobs is great. I've always been more entrepreneurial. And for me, I would say try to find something. And I talked to a group of people that was, people at the shelter. And one of them was like, hey, they want to get out. I said, well, why don't you see if you can get a window cleaning job for $100? You go downtown, which supplies. They were able to secure that. Do 3 or 4 of those, and then see if you can find somebody who could assist you for $25. And then you keep the spread. And then go the next one. So for me, that was entrepreneurial. And this person was able to go from living in a shelter to making money within a month because they weren't reliant upon outshining an applicant. They were reliant upon, my windows are dirty and I have a solution to your problem. And not that everybody said, oh my gosh, that'd be wonderful. But I mean, you show up with a kid, you show up with this, you show up and like, hey, if we're trying to get ahead, we'd like to clean your windows. I mean, people are inclined to give you an opportunity.
Love that answer. Just before we go to the break and after the break, I want to talk about that delicate subject called bankruptcy. And should Christians go bankrupt? I wanted you to unpack that for us, but just tell us a little bit more about the book. What's something else they're going to find out in this book? Who's eating your pie?
No, I think, I mean, as far as, if you want me to answer the question, I mean, everything I think is individual. There are laws there to protect people and to protect assets and to solve disputes. I think if you can honor something, that's obviously the best thing. But there are laws there. People have been very thoughtful to have them there for a reason.
Okay, we're going to come right back with Erik Weir, author of Who's Eating Your Pie. Stay with us on The Perspective. If at any time you'd like to talk to somebody, and we have scores and scores of people calling our line, it's 855-910-6297. We're here to help you, to pray with you, to help you to find faith in God. And some of you are just calling saying, I just need to talk to somebody right now. Maybe you're in a financial crisis. Why not call that number? There's people there to pray with you, to encourage you, to regain your perspective on the situation. Stay with us. I'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to The Perspective. Again, I'm Mike Sherbino, and the number to call at any time is 855-910-6297. We'd love to hear from you in your faith journey. Maybe there's something that we can do that can help you. We'll pray with you. We can send literature to you to help you as you process and navigate life. And one of the things that really causes a huge hiccup for most people is finances and handling them. And Erik Weir is a principal of global wealth management, and among many other things, he advises some of the who's who in the country on how to invest and handle their money. Erik, it hasn't always been an easy road for you. As you think back on your own journey, what's one story that stands out to you? Maybe it's one of the neat ones in the book, but I'd love to hear what's one of your favorite pivotal stories that helped you get a handle on money.
I think for me, it was, I just my parents went bankrupt, like I said earlier, and they lost everything. And if I wanted toys or anything, I had to buy them myself. So my first thing was a lemonade stand. As I got like 10 years old, I started cutting grass. And I quickly realized that I had a grass allergy because I'm like itching. I get sunburned easily because I'm super fair. I'm like, man, this is probably the max earning capability I have as a 10-year-old. And this is bad. This is bad. So, but I wanted to buy a bicycle. So then I ended up, out of necessity, noticing that other kids were in the neighborhood and that their parents were kind of hopeful that they would work. So then I turned the lemon into lemonade, so to speak. As I talked to the parents, I'm like, would you like to have your son help me cutting lawns? Sure. I said, love to have them. They have to use your lawnmower, your gas, and I'll pay them $5 a lawn. They're like, oh, that sounds fantastic. They kicked the kid off the sofa watching cartoons. Next thing you know, he's cutting grass. I'm charging $15 a yard, paying him $5. And I'm like, this allergy is working out, right? so I started getting 3 or 4 kids. It was a lawn service. You're looking down, I've got like a bunch of 10, 11, 12-year-olds who did not care for me particularly, but their parents were like, man, you're awesome. And I've just got this little workforce going out there cutting grass, and I'm peeling them off $5 a yard, keeping 10. Then that was a blessing, so you always got to look around, and I had to stutter, so limit it. So just whatever it is you're facing, think of a way to just reframe it.
I think I'm just laughing too hard at that story. And now I want you to unpack something else that's painful. Yeah. You started to talk about it before the break. Talk to us, as a Christian, I always heard you should never go bankrupt. You got to pay your bills. Yeah. Talk to us about that whole tension. What's that?
Bills is important, but I mean, there are situations that there are laws in place, because for bankruptcy, there's ways to settle things, give debtors, creditors closure, give you closure. You start over. If you go back to the Old Testament, there was a forgiveness of debts every 7 years or Jubilee. I forget the exact number of years, but there was forgiveness of debts and giving people a chance to start over. So I think that, being diligent is the priority, but there are situations that happen outside of people's control that there are laws in place to help resolve those matters.
Okay, there's another word that maybe our viewers haven't heard before. Maybe they have, but we talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament. there's a principle called tithing, giving first to God, a percentage. And if you especially think of the whole fact that, everything belongs to God anyways, if he gives me $10, he says, Michael, I want you to give back to me $1. It seems to me like that's a pretty good deal. But talk to me about how the tithing principle has impacted your life, and what do you do about giving to support ministries around the world or local churches that are doing great things? If you feel like, I don't have any money, I got nothing to go, how do you give to God if you don't have much?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and you read the New Testament, there was a widow who put in the widow's mite, and then there were wealthy people who put in lots of money, but the widow's mite, Jesus said, was more substantial than when anyone else put in, because it was small. It was a huge for her, though it was small for in comparison. And I think comparison living is really the thief of joy, and that's a big thing with social media. But going back to giving. I think what it does is it frees you, particularly if you're in a very difficult situation. If you give $1 just to something, it kind of frees you. That money no longer has the control or bondage over you. When you hang on to every dollar, it seems to almost be a spiritual thing where it controls you, everything about you. When you're able to give away, it creates a spirit of abundance, and it creates a kind of a different experience with money. And I can't really explain it, but it's almost like you're able to think more clearly about money, about finances. You don't view it as finite, but infinite, and you believe that there's more money out there by being generous. And there have been times that have no money, you could help at a shelter and give back. And when you go and, like, I went one time and sorted jackets over a holiday and clothing to be distributed because it was getting cold, and put them by sizes and things of that nature. And I went in there kind of feeling maybe a little, not sorry for myself, but a little down. And I left feeling very fortunate. I connected with people, saw people who were in far worse shape, and left there feeling very, very joyful. And also that I'd done something to help somebody else. And oftentimes a very act of helping someone else will not only elevate your mood, but elevate your situation in so many ways.
That's really helpful to hear, to have that perspective. There's an old phrase, when it comes to money, short-term pain for long-term gain. Talk to us about saving, and especially in the context, I don't know if it's true or not. I think each generation has its faults. We're very critical of people under the age of maybe 30, 35, that they want it right now. And so they are mounting up huge debt. What would you say? How do you live with that balance of wanting stuff and saying, I can go without?
I think it's really education. If you believe that everything is instant gratification, it's very hard to have a long-term perspective. When they ended up, Harvard did a 50-year study, and they realized that the longer someone's could wait for gratification, or the longer term the perspective was, the more wealth they created. For example, if someone saved $100 a month from like age 18 to 30 versus age 30 to 65, the person did 18 to 30 and stopped, versus the person from 30 to 65 and did it every month and never stopped. The first person would have more money just because of time. And that's assuming an S&P 500 kind of U.S. stock market returns, 9-10% with compounding. So it's been said one of the wonders of the world is compounding. And it's very slow at first, but it's kind of like a hockey stick in the end. So I think that if you look at, I remember when Starbucks was $1.50, now it's like $6 for a cup of coffee, right? But if you look, what is $6 today? What's that worth in 20 years? It's a much, much, much larger number. Maybe it's $25, right? So recognize that $6 has a cost. And not that you can't enjoy things, you can, but if everything's urgent, everything's important, I need to consume everything today, then nothing's special.
Interesting insight. Erik Weir is the author of Who's Eating Your Pie? We want to make it available to the first 20 people who write to us. prayer@theperspective.tv. Just write in and say, I'd like a copy of Erik's book, and we're going to send it to you free of charge. And then it's going to cost you for the rest of your life as we unpack some of these principles. It will change your life, but we want to bless you with this. Erik, as usual, thanks for coming on. Love the stories. They make me laugh. I got about 10 more questions on just investing, but maybe I can set up a meeting with you about that later. Love having you
That'd
with
be
us.
great. Oh, it's my pleasure. And again, it's always a pleasure. And thank you.
Thanks, Erik. Hey, stay with us here on The Perspective. I'm going to be right back in just a moment.
Thank you.
1 in 5 Canadians struggle with a mental illness. Hi, my name is Alan Gallant, and I'm the Executive Director of Agora Network Ministries, a ministry that my wife and I founded based on my own crisis. Our ministry is to help anyone that's struggling with the mental health. We target the church and the believer in Jesus, and our aim is to help you move forward in your mental wellness.
When I was a kid, living next door to us was the local barber for the town that I lived in, the great metropolis of Osgood, Ontario, about 40 kilometers outside of the city of Ottawa. So all of that to say, I don't remember much about my neighbor, except one day in particular, he seemed to walk into our house without knocking on the door at supper time, came right to the table, looked at me, and in his hand, he was holding a rock. And he said, "Does this rock belong to you?" Because I found it inside my living room as it went through the window. And I kind of gulped, looked at my dad, and realized that, one of my pitches must have gone astray. Just kind of happened somehow. My good old dad fixed the window, repaired it, and all of that. That's the one thing I remember about my neighbor. The second thing I remember about him was that he was a ham operator junkie. Now, by a ham operator, maybe that's a term you don't understand, but he was one of these guys that had antennas going up the side of his house. And he had this massive radio. He could spin the dials and he could zoom in on pretty much any country around the world and listen in to radio programs. And I thought that was just fascinating. All through this week, I want to talk about zooming in and listening to God. And sometimes we think listening to God is a lot like adjusting the dials on a ham radio set. We got to get the right frequency. We need to get tuned in. And nothing, I think, could actually be further from the truth. Because what I want us to unpack is the fact that it's not difficult to hear God's voice, but we need to choose to have that desire to say, God, I want to listen to you. And then as I'm going to be teaching later on this week, it's not just does God speak to us, but what am I going to do with what he tells me to do? And do you ever think about why we need to hear God's voice? That's so critical. And one of the reasons we need to hear God's voice is so that we can make wise decisions. We're talking with Erik today, and many times I think all of us would say we have made poor decisions about handling our money. Why? Well, did you ever think about consulting God about how you spend your money and saying, God, is this really what you want me to spend my money on? I think another thing is that as we make decisions, and that decision can be who I marry, talking to someone recently about a job change, or talking to other people about certain things that are so critical in their life. Even as I lead a church and a media ministry, I need wisdom from God. And the Bible says in the book of James, it says, if any of you lack wisdom, ask God, because he gives generously to people. And God wants us to be listening for his voice. Sometimes he speaks through friends. He'll speak through God's word. He will speak to us by the inner promptings in our heart, but he wants us to make wise decisions. Why? Well, secondly, so that you and I can avoid catastrophe. And many times people want to put their hands up to God, saying, I'm not going to listen to him. I'm just going to move on in my own way right now. Many times people think I'm a follower of Jesus, but you know what? At least I claim to be that. But I'm going to do my own thing right here. God will understand. Well, let's listen to what God said. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 13, he says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it, but small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Another reason that we need to listen up for God's voice is so that you and I can live out the purpose for which God has created us. You know, imagine with me a scene. Person has come to the end of their life. they're looking all around at everybody, their family, their friends. They're thinking about how they've lived. And a stranger comes in and says, can I ask you this question? Have you lived out the purpose for which God has created you? Go. Man, we don't want to fail the test, especially as we come to the end. And that's why I believe another reason we need to listen up for what God is saying is so that we can experience the happiness that God has intended us to enjoy. All through this week, I'm going to talk about how to listen for God's voice. I hope you'll stay with us. And at any time, call that toll-free number. There are people there to pray with you and to help you to listen for what it is that God is saying to you.
Hi there. My name's Ryan, and I played a little bit in the NHL. I played a lot on teams, almost 60 years on teams. A guy by the name of Jim Wilder enlightened me recently. He said there's 3 types of players on your team. Every team, church team, business team, every team. Number 1, you got possums. And when things don't go well, possums play dead. Number 2, you have predators. Predators go after the possums. They're looking for the edge. Number 3 is you have protectors. And every team that I can look back on, if we had more protectors than we had predators, that was a different team. Here's my point. Jesus is the good shepherd. He's the ultimate protector. Are we growing towards being a protector? Are we growing towards being a predator? Or are we still a possum?
Two of the things that we make available to you every week is how to connect with us. One is through our prayer line. It's 24/7, and you can call 855-910-6297. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to pray with you and help you in this journey of meeting and discovering God's purpose and plan for your life. And the other way is you can write to me. You can write to me, prayer@theperspective.tv. And if you write to me this week, I'd like you to also request from me this little book. It's called Just Start. As you're listening for God's voice, could it be that he's saying to you right now, it's time to start your relationship with me? And this little book will help you to understand the basics of building a relationship with God. I want you to know that you are loved by God, that he cares for you. And today he's inviting you to be part of his family, to live the rest of your life with him. Ask him in faith. Say, Jesus, will you be my Savior and Lord today? I'm sorry for my sin. And when you pray that prayer, he's always promised to hear. Write to me or call us today. And thanks for listening to The Perspective.